So that brought me back. I want to come back.
It closed the understanding.
This was basically it. So it was interview by externally, and you get
They don't understand
the whole school, and they were extremely happy, which made me that happy. Because everybody was ecstatic about it. Hope I live up to it.
I mean, it's in Poland. I had a master's student who was teacher who was doing this stuff like
I think it's a good place.
Hey, Shahala, how are you doing? Hi, nice to see you. Yes, yes, yes. How are you then? Right? Yeah. Good.
I will chair, so you guys get the tough questions ready, okay? Especially for Mark. You know?
Danny's been around, yes. When did you travel over? Okay. What time are you on? I've got a battery session.
I'm going to Germany for 3 weeks on Friday. I didn't want to because last year's woman said when you spend the summer on the continent because it's too hot. But now I have all of my friends in English.
Yes, yes, right.
Yeah, it's really nice. But I don't like go to second year.
How long will you be in Copenhagen? 2 months. Right, okay. Interesting. So you can relax now.
Polish.
I'm not looking forward to the heat. I want a winter wedding. It's snow and everything.
Should go further north.
Oh, I've heard, I know.
And you lived in I'm really not long. Did you see them? Oh no, the last time we were there was in Mars. Yeah. Not for them, from also European standards, yes.
That's crazy coming here with Polish vodka.
Look at it back, The supermarket prices as well. This can affect electronics You need to watch presentation. So we'll watch your
Good morning, everybody. I think we should get going. It's a few minutes past, so I hope you all enjoyed last evening's dinner. Thank you for showing up that early today. My name is Dieter Kogler. I have the honor to chair this panel here. I'm from University College Dublin. I was filling in, originally this session should have been chaired by Martin Henning. As many of you know, Martin unfortunately can't be here, so I was asked a little late in the game, but I'm obviously super delighted to be here. About myself, so I have a strong connection to Regional Studies Association. I've been a former conference organizer back in 2017. We had the RSA in Dublin. I've been a board member. I've been for 10 years a regional studies editor. So that's the connection here. So we have 4 fantastic panelists today. So let me just introduce them quickly to you. So we have Weiwen Gong, who is professor at Stavanger University. Her research focuses on innovation, regional industrial development, sustainability transitions, emerging green production networks, and value chains on batteries in Europe and China. So she brings a strong international perspective on green transitions and similar things. So that's Weiwen. Emma Omyot is senior lecturer at Curts at Newcastle University. Her research critically explores subnational governance and power with focus on entrepreneurial housing, governance, and gender inequalities in regional development. And Emma is particularly interested in how local leadership and policy processes are shaped by intersecting structures of gender, class, race, and how these influence regional futures. Next, at the very end here, we have Mark Tweeder-Jones, Professor of Cities and Regions at University College London at the Bartlett School. His work focuses on urban and regional planning, governance, land use, and future-oriented thinking about cities and regions. So he brings a valuable planning and policy perspective to our discussion today. And finally, Hans, sitting just beside me, Hans Westlund, is Professor of Urban and Regional Studies at the Royal Institute of Technology and Professor of Entrepreneurship at Jönköping International Business School. His work spans regional development, social capital, entrepreneurship, innovation, and the dynamics of cities and regions. He brings a broad and highly experienced perspective on how regions develop and adapt over time. And this, of course, is also a topic today, so we're looking at history and how we can learn from that going forward. Let's just move on. So I obviously didn't want to take, so those are very short bios. Those 4 have done fantastic work, and again, I couldn't be more delighted. What we're trying to do is we have about 10 minutes each where they give us their thoughts on the topic, and then we will transition to a Q&A where I will collect a few questions at a time, and the panel then can respond to that. So without further ado, I think we will hand over to Mark. Thank you.
Thanks, Dieter, and good morning, everyone. I'd like to obviously thank the organisers for inviting me to be part of the panel for this plenary, but also thank the organisers for setting one of the most difficult exam questions I think I've ever had to face in trying to pin down the subject under discussion. And that is about the long shadow of perhaps former interpretations of regionalism and regional development and implications of the past for the present and the implications of the present for the future as well, all in 10 minutes, of course. I think my sort of take on this, and it's fair to say that probably all four of us will have very different interpretations, thankfully, of what we're about to discuss, and no doubt you will as well. So this is my take on the subject. But I think for me there's sort of three themes that I wouldn't mind teasing out as the basis of perhaps a contribution. That is essentially that what we mean by the region has changed fundamentally over 100 years, and it will continue to change as well. It is something that's very difficult to pin down. It oscillates between different interpretations. It oscillates between more academic critiques and conceptualization into methodologies, into frameworks, into strategies, into political programs of action, or even actually what's outside those sorts of interpretations and definitions as well. That is both useful, but also it can be problematic as well to pin it down in order to perhaps justify a form of intervention or create something more proactive rather than reactive. Regional development also means that we sometimes focus on the frame, on the region, on the boundaried aspects of what the region might mean, whereas lots of other people will focus on what's inside the region and those different spatial variations, different structural problems, those who have prominence in shaping that space, and those perhaps who would like additional powers to shape that space as well. And then thirdly, regions are shaped as much by external forces out with individual regions as they are by what goes on inside those regions as well. So they can be quite useful politically, they can be quite agile, but also that makes them incredibly vulnerable as well, and subject to change. What I think I'll do is, I'll go through a few interpretations of what region has meant over 100 years, and I'm taking quotes from the contents of regional studies. So if you look at the contents of Regional Studies, the journal, then it is a useful smorgasbord of different interpretations of the region, as reflected in different academic interpretations of the region over the time. So if we look, for example, at the start about its radical origins, going back to Patrick Geddes in 1915, then Geddes was concerned about the regional whole. Nelson provides a useful quote here. Regional whole was this conceptual core view of the world that abolished distinctions between producers and consumers, humans and nature, work and leisure, and community administration. It offered the conceptual basis on which to construct a radical critique of industrial modernity. That puts it way up there as something that totally demolishes what was existing at the time from a conceptual point of view, and says this is new, this is different, and its radicalism is the important element that's been put on the table here. If you fast forward, though, just say 50 years after that, when regionalism has been embraced, perhaps governmentally, perhaps politically, through strategies, politicians perhaps have been elected at the regional level as well, and you have a slightly different dynamic going on about what the region means. So Kuklinski, for example, writing in 1970, specifically about regional planning, was saying that regional planning should be, first of all, a method of, I don't think that was me, should be, first of all, a method of imaginative and rational thinking about the regional dimension in the development of a given society. So the mono-alternative dynamic approach, which would penetrate deeply into the general political, economic, social, and cultural discussions in the given country. The important aspect there is a method of imaginative and rational thinking. Essentially, it's starting to become institutionalized into a process, into a method, as part perhaps of the policy strategy process, or perhaps the planning system as well. Rational thinking, all the rage in mid-20th century planning circles and planning theory as well. So we've gone from a regional whole, total demolition of what's there already, into a complete reinterpretation on a conceptual basis associated with Geddes, into something now which has started to be have some parameters put around it as a method of interpretation. If we move forward again, then we see so checking this there, then we see the region being interpreted again in a slightly different way. Something that has gone through institutionalism, that has gone through systems thinking, that is a rational method, a procedural-based approach, into something now which is much perhaps more fluid, or perhaps doesn't capture the actual ideals of the spirit of regionalism, perhaps the originators of the ideas of regionalism had in mind. So it's fluid, it's changeable, perhaps it's convenient as much as anything else. So John Allen and Alan Cochrane writing in 2007, saying the idea of regions as territorially fixed in some vital political sense is a stubborn conception, one that is mobilized to pursue selective interests and to establish regional identities. It would seem that the language of territorial politics is not only stubborn, but equally it cannot simply be wished away by some conceptual wand, since it is itself a powerful political construction. In other words, this was the time when we started to rethink the idea of boundaried regions, of fixed administrative entities, on things that don't fit the flows of urban and regional change. And actually, we needed something to reflect that spirit of change, a spirit of working across boundaries, moving away from what Doreen Massey used to call a billiard board view of administrative units as being the solutions to some of our problems. So the region has moved on again from something conceptual into something procedural, into something that should be much more fluid than boundaries. And then finally, we'll come on to this as being perhaps something left over that's not the nation and not the local. So the region is important, but to what extent is it essential? And this is where we find political interpretations of the region in some nation states. The idea that perhaps is superfluous to requirements. It is beyond, if you like, the national governments. It is beyond the importance of local municipalities. It is something in between, and therefore it's vulnerable. So John Glasson, writing in 2014, saying regional planning occupies a strange niche in planning. It is often regarded as an intruder, the cuckoo in the nest, between more powerful local and national government domains. Indeed, it's probably one of the most contested fields in the array of planning activities. Yet it has managed to survive. It lurches on. Sometimes it goes away. Sometimes it comes back. It's viewed as a convenient political frame in which to deal with regional differentials, unevenness, all those horrible political throwaway phrases that politicians seem to be wedded to periodically and change them too. Or you could look at Andy Pike's work with his colleagues about aspirations for local and regional development are beset with potential problems, but not having a vision of one, of what one wants local and regional development to do and to look like would make such a task even harder. In other words, we still want them, we still like them, we still use them, even if they become a little bit more agile and becoming things that are susceptible and vulnerable to political forces. I think what that means is we can try and sum up what's going on by reference to a very handy list and short list of different issues that we're facing with. I told you it was short. These are all the different forms that certainly we can think of. This is work from Daniel Galland and John Harrison, myself, that we just published, about looking at the different determinants that will shape regions, whether they're fixed entities, boundaried, or they soft spaces and more agile forms. And the governing forms, the political forms, the operational forms, the implementation forms, all create oscillation in the style of region that we're talking about, in the functions that they have, in the expectations that we have of what regions are meant to do, moving from the conceptual into procedural, into something agile, into something that's politically quite valuable. And all these things, I'm not going to go into each one, but all these things means that what we're seeing with the region are multiple interpretations, sometimes in the same region, a series of pendula that swing back and forth between thin and thick institutions, between the purpose, between whether they're there for national differential issues or more localized, more than local issues as well. But all these pendulum continue and swing against each other. And that's quite useful if you're academics, by the way, because there's so much that we can study about the form of region. So I'll finish on this more as provocations, I should say, for discussion. So if we dealt with the past, we looked at the present, then what does the future hold? Well, I think in where we are today, any focus on the long term for regional policy is going to be difficult. It's going to be increasingly out of reach because of the forces that we're seeing trying to control regions or operate them or try and shape territory more generally and act upon. So long-term perspective, but the idea then that trying to do something about it will forever be slightly out of reach over actually achieving that. The region will also be at the mercy of fluid governance, shaped by constitutional settlement, because obviously it varies country to country and nation to nation about how fixed the region is, but also politics and also identity. And even within those three, there are different interpretations of what the region is expected to do and perform. Static, fixed plans and methods for regions, the things that were the hallmark of 20th century forms of regionalism, the regional whole, if you go back to the Geddes interpretation, will be increasingly archaic. They will still be used by some nations and still be used by some regions, but the world is moving on into something much more instant and much more dynamic. Data-rich innovation, just-in-time systems will shape intelligence, it will shape investment, it will shape reaction, activism, and politics. So the frame might become less important as to the activities that go on inside the frame. Focused policy, focused funding, territorial interventions will become the norm, as they already are. And we have a phrase in English called little local victories, where you achieve something, that David will achieve something against the great Goliath. Well, here we might be looking at little regional victories in the program of long-term change. Regional differentials, of course, will remain important for all of us and politically, but we'll need to find alternative, rewired political and democratic programs. And I don't think we have those at the present time. And the question will be, whose role will it be to undertake that sort of rewiring, and who will be the enabler of it? Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Mark. Emma.
Can everyone hear me okay? Oh, I'm coming through now, I can hear that. Hi, I'm really delighted to be here amongst colleagues on the panel today. So huge thanks to Regional Studies Association, and also a thanks I'm relatively new to Regional Studies, and I found this community to be really welcoming and really supportive of the work that I've been doing, so I'm really grateful for that. And that's what I wanted to use my platform to talk about today, is some of the work that I've been doing around gender and place leadership, also intersectional approaches as well. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how I've got here in my thinking, what I'm currently thinking about, and hopefully that might inform our discussion about legacies of the past and how we think about the future. But I recognise that this might be an outlier of some of the talks. So, starting back in 2023, I had an article published in Regional Studies called Level With Us, Regional Development is Still Man-Shaped. And that paper asked us as an intellectual community to engage a bit more, or a lot more, with feminist scholarship and how we understand local and regional development. And that paper was really built on a long line of feminist practice and scholarship work. And just off the bat, I want to recognise a kind of frustration that exists amongst many colleagues that I speak to, that although that huge legacy of scholarship exists, it's often kind of sidelined. The wider dialogue in the field of sometimes economic geography or regional studies can remain quite static. So as Louisa Moore said, work is often rendered merely feminist, so it's often siphoned off and annexed. So feminist and gender-sensitive approaches can sometimes be put into the field of culture rather than being really central to political economy and how we think about development is and who it's for. So I want to focus on the kind of gender and intersectional lens that I've been taking in the work that I've been doing towards local and regional development. The 2023 paper that I mentioned, in summary, argue that gender coding is really embedded in how we're thinking about development. It very much relies on selected versions of the past, which continue to dominate our place imaginaries today, and also how we think about the future. So this masculine gaze over time and space really limits our reading of present inequalities, so the things that we research and the things that we see. And I kind of called forward some work by a black feminist writer, Lola Olufemi, who talked about the idea of becoming otherwise. So calling forward ideas of hopes and dreams and the political project of imagining. How do we think about the future alternatively that isn't really rooted in this idea of being fixed in a particular past and a selective past? So I've been doing some empirical work in the northeast of England, where I'm based. So the images that you can see on the slide here are from that. This is a region that is, it's built on an industrial history of heritage, which is hugely important. So we have a long legacy of shipbuilding, of coal mining. And that's really shaped the materiality of the place and particularly identity as well. But what's often overlooked in these kind of histories and selected versions of the past is how male-dominated those industries were, and how these industries have really deeply shaped our political and economic ordering. So the masculine work that gets done, the ideas of hard work and graft, really influence how we think about domestic life, political life, and leisure. And they really continue to resonate quite deeply in terms of culture. So when you add loss to that, so deindustrialization, we're kind of left with a regional haunting in a way, a kind of fixing of a particular past in our minds, and also that really infiltrates the present and ideas of struggle. So past is hugely important, of course, but it's also really partial. It overlooks the role of women in regional life, also our role in empire building in the UK, with the wealth creation through oppression and extraction that continues to be overlooked. So I went into the archives as part of this research to try and find, you know, a kind of alternative histories, we might call it, although I'm slightly uncomfortable with that phrase. Recognising that archives themselves are really selective and power-laden, I found some really great things around women's organising, around cooperatives. Some images here, you can see the role of women in the miners' strikes was hugely important, had a huge part in political life, but that's often a history that is ignored. I also found some really great examples of lesbian housing cooperatives. There was a newspaper in the region called the Pink Pages, which supported a queer network, sort of underground at the time. So these kind of hidden and quieter histories led me to go back to Elizabeth Grote's work about time. And this work really encourages us to think about time not as linear, but this idea that it's very much related to, but has a gaze cast to the past. And that's what I'm very much finding in this region. So I also touched on the calls for futurity as part of that, and Julie McLeavy and others have done some really great work around that, encouraging us to think about breaking away from the concept of time as linear and allow us to see the future as more open, as connected to the past, but not fixed in a past kind of patriarchal arrangement that we continue to have. It was kind of a call to engage with a range of feminist ideas and break the cycle of reproducing masculine coded ways of seeing and understanding development, and the capacity to think about otherwise futures. So this led me to think and do some work about place-based leadership. I was really interested in kind of the question that Mark ended with who's making these decisions. So who's setting the agenda? I published an article in 2025, again in Regional Studies, so thank you again for the support, which advances feminist and intersectional and anti-racist approaches to place-based leadership. In that, I'm sort of arguing fundamentally that leadership is deeply unequal in terms of representation, in terms of practice, but also in terms of how we as a community are perhaps thinking about leadership as well. So a lot of leadership theory was built on formal leaders or understandings of who it is that stands up and leads places. But just to acknowledge that 18% of national leaders are women, 34% of leaders globally are women. Women tend to be underrepresented in senior and C-level roles. They face continual barriers to employment. The list goes on. I won't sit and read it out. This isn't a women's issue. This is a democratic issue and a deeply unequal issue that we should all be concerned about. So much of the kind of informal, and there is some great work on this as well, informal leadership is done by oftentimes women in communities and women of colour as well, certainly in the UK. So I'm interested in the boundaries between what we call formal and informal, and I'm doing this very deliberately because these terms themselves are problematic and imply a kind of power structure and hierarchy that I think is unfair. But many people who are leading communities and working behind the scenes are often doing so on limited or no resources, but are really deeply shaping places that we live in communities. So they're hugely stretched and feel at a very distant from formal leadership and decision making. And across all sectors of leaders that I spoke to in the region, so even when in positions of power, so in formal leadership, leaders continue to face and encounter structures of power and oppression. So I heard a lot about decision making still being made in pubs, on golf courses, at football matches. A lot of leaders talk to me about their experience of harassment, of misogyny, of homophobia, of racism. Leaders talk to me about strategies that they employ when working in the region. So women taking voice coaching lessons in order to just be heard in meetings. Thinking about what to wear, thinking about where to go at what particular times, using humour as armour. These strategies will not be a surprise to many people in the room. There's also a current fear about young leaders coming forward and what social media is doing, making these kind of contexts really worse for a lot of, especially young girls. And it's also really difficult for people to talk about the language of gender and of race and have those kind of conversations. So all of these things really impact how leaders are actually doing the job, how they're shaping places. I think the relations and power structures that people are continuing to navigate. And I found it particularly striking that leaders found it really difficult to articulate a vision of the future. I think this has got in part to do with the kind of political cycles that we have. So the continual political struggle that people face, thinking about their own positions and re-election, they kind of feel precarious. But when asked about the future, minds are often set either to the present, the sense of struggle, or very much to a past, like a past struggle. It was really difficult to get leaders to articulate a vision of the future. So that kind of sense of loss of old industry, loss of community, a loss of identity and pride still very much resonates. And the project of imagining the future, even for people who were tasked to do that, was really challenging. As one person said, the region's future is very much tied up in its own mythology. So the kind of stories that we tell ourselves, the narratives that run really deep. And that isn't just an issue of how we see ourselves in the past, it's shaping how we see ourselves now and limiting our ability to think about the future. So kind of recognising that industries that we come forward, the green transition, things like that, are still male-dominated. The kind of policies are still very gender-blind in that regard. I just want to end on a more of a hopeful note. So much is going on in the region that has roots in the past forms of organisation, but they're often hidden. So the histories that might have been hidden or deliberately erased, silenced or quietened, or even forgotten, they still shape the place. Things still happened that still matter today. And we can think of this as the past kind of having tendrils or even seeds that we might plant, ideas which might have lain dormant for a long time, might emerge at particular moments, or might travel to elsewhere. That's how I'm trying to think at the moment through ideas of time. And there's, of course, a particular geography to this, so taking a huge a place-sensitive approach that not all places are the same. There are clearly really great examples of gender-sensitive planning that take place in places like Barcelona, Vienna, Umea. We'll have people in the room who will know more about this than I. But even in the northeast of England, where those kind of policies are not in place, there's quite a things happening. So some of the images that you can see behind me relate to the first women's policy network that I was at that's been set up in Newcastle. There's a really vibrant women and girls sector, lots of community organising, lots of lobbying, pushing. You can see some of the consultations that are happening in the region today about women's safety, or making claims for manifestos that are in place that recognise the role of women and girls, and demonstrations and marches and things like this. So even though in the northeast we had some recent local elections in May, and we now have 24% less female councillors than we did earlier in the year. So taking one city, Newcastle, as an example, we did have 42% of women local councillors. Since May's local elections, we now have 26%. So it's a huge step back in many ways in terms of representation, but that's not even touching the surface of equality and what that means. We see in the right-wing swing towards reform that have come into power, whose kind of core is to de-centre equality, diversity and inclusion. So it's hugely worrying, but that doesn't deny or erase all of the work that's gone on before to get us here, to get us where we are, to get us in the room, to get me on this platform able to say these things. So I'm really thinking about the need to make space for us to see and hear and be attentive to inequalities and remember that progress is already being made. So to end, I'm currently reading a book by Rebecca Solnit, who wrote previously Hope in the Dark, but has a new book called The Beginning Comes After the End. And if anyone is in need of a hopeful call to arms, I'd deeply recommend this. So to end with a quote from Rebecca, who says, "The progressives have a habit of saying tomorrow the good things should begin, when often the good things are underway, if even embryonic, embattled, or otherwise uncertain." Thank you.
Thank you, Emma. The good thing is definitely underway, and let's continue with Vivian, please.
Yeah, thanks a lot, and good morning, everyone. And thank you for the organizers for inviting me to this very interesting panel discussion. So we were given this question whether regions can escape their past, and this immediately sort of speak to actually what I became sort of interested in futures. I think me and Emma share a lot of this interest in futures, but we probably approach it from different perspectives. So I came from this more broader EEG perspective, and during my PhD, I tried to understand like how probably a lot of the EEG and path development scholars in the audience do, like try to understand like how certain industries develop in regions and how did they sort of evolve over time, and how sort of they shape the current status of regions and their sort of economic well-beings. But then during also my case studies, I found out something that is not fully sort of explained by this kind of EEG framework, path dependency, log-in, relatedness and all that. And I'll give you basically two examples. One is in my hometown, which is a coastal peripheral region, actually it's called Ningde, and it's very close to Taiwan for a long time. Our region was very much specialized on tea planting and also like a fishery, so we didn't have strong manufacturing industries because we are very close to Taiwan. So the concern of the tension between mainland China and Taiwan, so during this kind of planning economy period, there was not a lot of manufacturing industry being located in this region. So it was also, the region was disconnected from like national transport network for a long time. So even though it's in the coastal area, but it was relatively undeveloped. But since 2008, something sort of fundamentally different changed, because there was largest lithium-ion battery company sort of being established there. And then this region, they start to imagine something very bold. So they say, we need to now rebrand ourselves, not as the economic lowland of coastal China, but actually we should rebrand ourselves as the lithium-ion battery capital of the world. And but that part is not really captured, this kind of very like deviation from history, not covered really by the EEG framework. And then I did another case study in Baden-Württemberg, where many of you probably know that it's one of the most important automotive region in Germany. And they were very proud of their identity of being the cradle of the automobile. But then they had, of course, with this kind of transformation, they had issues with this kind of cradle sort of identity. And in 2017, around 70-ish, they tried to rebrand themselves as the future mobility made in Baden-Württemberg. So they want to turn their sort of telescope into the future and then say, okay, we want to be still relevant in the future. So, but they cannot deviate much from their historical legacy of automotive industry. So they say future mobilities. So this make me think also a lot of the conventional EEG perspective. Like they were very powerful in spreading like how we regions got into the current point in time, but I think it lacks some kind of explanatory power in terms of explaining like this part on futures. And so basically that's why I'm get interested in this kind of future perspective. And so key message here is that regions do not have probably one path. They have multiple paths that can be used and reinterpreted in different ways for the benefit of regional actors. And for me, this kind of regional literacy is a very important capability of regions to, let's say, work with, let's say, a vision that maybe connect to their past, but without being fully captured by it. And then this kind of course, futures and past, they go hand in hand. So like, which, you know, in terms of how many percentage future is taking an upper hand or the past, I think it always depends on the context. So some of these ideas I elaborated in this paper, but I just want to, in this talk, strengthen, or let's say, go a little bit deeper in these points. So first of all, like I said, regional past is not just singular. So we know that history is like consists of many different episodes. And what becomes powerful in the moment is often a political decision. And so actually this kind of rediscovery or reinterpretation of history happens all the time. And also in case studies, you see some regions, they go back to long history and try to rediscover something, especially in the culture industry, you know, this kind of cultural, historical legacy, try to legitimize, for example, some cultural industries in the current time. And so two contrasts I put here. So also Gothenburg is a manufacturing region in Sweden. So like in this type of manufacturing region, you can reimagine this kind of manufacturing capability of something that is of future relevance. So you can transfer into this kind of green industrial capabilities. But at the same time, I mean, we also observe in many other so-called old industrial areas where this kind of past industrial glory actually become that's a barrier for this more progressive development, because those really best days in the old days, or the best time in the old days, prevent them from moving towards something better or more progressive. So they have resentment, you know, the past were much better than today, and things like that. And the other thing, as we in the literature, or in the literature now, there's a lot of interest in periphery, but peripheral regions used to be sort of interpreted as something innovative and negatively sort of friend. But today, I think when we talk about peripheral, it's like something very exciting for experiment, for autonomy, also for creativity. But also, I think in today's panel, we touch upon a little bit on that. So this kind of peripheral regions, because they are also in the very densely connected social networks, people know each other, and that could also sort of narrow the vision for what is, desirable for ours. So there's a strong sense of boundary between us and sort of external, let's say, newcomers. And so I think the question is not really can regions escape the past, but it's more like which reading of the past actually become politically, let's say, mobilizing and also dominant. And so I think that's why I think, like I just mentioned in the beginning, that we have a lot of tools and concepts and theories to explain past, but probably we need also better frameworks to explain future, and more importantly, also connect that to what has brought us to today. So that's the history part, and I don't have to, let's say, read out all those concepts. I guess many of you have been, or maybe even currently are working on those concepts. But I think what this kind of future literacy perspective can add is like ask new questions, ask things like how we actually deviate from the past, and how can we, or if not deviate, if there's still assets in the history, how can we rediscover, reinterpret it in the new way so that it's actually beneficial to the current development, and also, let's say, more coherent, let's say, more equal and also inclusive future. And so this future literacy has strong connections, of course, to the past, and it has, basically it's a capability, in my view, to work with the past without being captured by it. And so this is a capability of diagnostic, see how, for example, past structure or future, what is possible in the current time, but also be able to see that what is actually possible without that, let's say, we can get rid of also this all kinds of historical concerns and also legacies. And this capability is also a critical capability, and I think Emma dealt with a lot on this kind of who questions. And I mean, gender is one part, but also there's a lot of voices being sort of silenced because they're simply not invited to the table of discussion. So I think this kind of who question is really very important. Who has the capability to speak for the region, and who actually is being silenced or not even sort of invited to the discussion table. And of course, this kind of capability is also experimentation, because future is largely unknown. So you also have this kind of gut, or like this kind of, let's say, this kind of confidence to try new things, even though you know that it might not work out, always as intended. But this kind of environment where this kind of trying error and experimentation is allowed, I think it's very important to explore also future. And so to make new futures, I think some histories will be maintained, some will actually be abandoned, and some will be forgotten, or some will be reinterpreted. So I think how the past and the future go together, there's always like very complicated. Probably it's also like place specific in a way. And I think this also has strong really implications, because nowadays when we talk about regional development, we talk about let's give more money to innovation. But I think before we decide on, where we put, let's say how much money we put, we should also discuss where, and and also how much we actually allow people to experiment with new things. So this kind of imagination need to be cultivated, and also making this kind of history, because I think a lot of regions, they are really scared of moving towards the future, because they simply think it's unknown. So maybe the best way is not to do anything about it. But I think a good regional policy should actually encourage this kind of history to be debated and discussed, and also, and make people feel a little bit braver to step out of their comfort zone to do something maybe different. And so I think I'll skip this just because of time concerns. So this basically, we talk a lot about smart spatialization, or talk about mission-oriented policies. And I think we have also consensus here that this process need to also bring in as many people and many voices. I think that's the right direction to go. But I think another issue, again, should not be captured, of course, by history alone. So my last message, of course, also answer to the question. I don't think regions can escape the past easily, but they can always become more literate. That's what the future literacy is about, on how past is being used to construct what kind of futures. So past can be reinterpreted, recombined, and also very importantly, being political rights. So we should actually talk very openly about what the past brings us, and what it, if it doesn't serve us any longer, that should also become an issue that, put on the discussion table. I think I will just stop here. Thank you very much. two special sessions coming up just after this one. So if you are interested, just join us in the session. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Ivan. And last but certainly not least, Hans.
Thank you, Dieter. I'd say it will be difficult to come up with something relevant after these three really excellent talks, but I'll do my very best. Let me see. Thank you also to the organizers who have invited me here. I'm not very often in Gothenburg, but I like the city very much. In particular, I like the jokes they are telling here. Most often impossible to translate to other languages. That's the real charm. But I didn't come here only to tell about my love for the city. I'm also here to try to say something about regional development. And I can start with saying that I was born in another world, not on Mars, but I grew up in the countryside of northern Sweden. And when I was a little boy, every family there had a little farm. They had a horse. The men were working in the forestry. During the winter in particular, the women took care of the cows and other animals. That was in the end of the 1950s. During the 1960s, 1/3 of the population in our municipality disappeared. Somewhere else, they moved away. 1/3 in one decade. Yeah, so very, very fast, that old world where they never had heard about the knowledge economy, ICT or AI, that world just disappeared. We can say that we have then had this transformation, we talked much about that, from the manufacturing economy to the knowledge economy. The supply of natural resources is not so important anymore, but the human capital has become much more important. And we have gone from, say, focusing at production factors, at least partly, to focus on the consumption instead, the consumption of amenities. Not only tourism, which basically is consumption of amenities, but also focus on people's leisure time. And this has been expressed in many ways, that we have gone from a situation where people follow jobs to the jobs follow people. And the policy recommendations have often been to build city centers, I would say, for the creative class, or whatever we want to call them. But what about all the others? And I'm saying this I want to stress that the policy problem is the simplifications, and that we just focus on one topic and think that this will solve. This is the policy problem. I think no one has avoided noticing that there is a World Cup in football going on in North America. Maybe we can make an analogy here with regional development. I know it sounds weird, but we can say, football, you need a pitch. Technology can be the sort of pitch for regional development. Then institutions, governance, policy, social capital as well, make sort of the rules of the game, and the agents, not least the entrepreneurs, are the players that can change the game. However, we cannot draw this analogy too far, because football was established as a sport that we know today in the end of the 1800s. The pitch It's almost the same today, although a bit better. The rules, principally the same, and the players play the same game, although the players have become much, much better. But the pitch where I was born, the manufacturing industrial society with still a foot in the agricultural society, that is gone now. The institutions that sort of made the rules of the game in the industrial society are gone, or at least they should be gone. And the players at that time, the agents, they know how to play the game then. But today we need another human capital. We need another type of players. So it's very much about how to successfully break a path with the old technology, obsolete institutions, governance, and social capital, and the lack of entrepreneurs, which I would say are one very important type of the agents that are more important today than perhaps they were before. Many regions have tried to learn from Silicon Valley, but we should realize that there are very few centers of technology revolutions. Most regions need to import the technology from other places. When they do it, they can, of course, do incremental innovations, small improvement, and use it adapted to the regional conditions. But if technological breakthrough already has come in other regions, maybe it is agency that is most important. Entrepreneurs that can change or circumvent institutions, etc., and make something happen. But how do we get the entrepreneurs there? Or how can we make them stay there so that they don't go to Silicon Valley or at least to Stockholm or other centers that welcome them most often? The breakthrough of the knowledge economy and ICT meant a strengthening of the agglomeration forces. We had, from the 80s and onwards, a reurbanization from smaller to larger centers since the traditional urbanization was in principle finished. And the usual explanations that all of us have been talking about and lecturing about is that knowledge production, innovation needs eye-to-eye contacts, and concentration of these agents have been necessary. And ICT at that time, in the 1980s and 90s, was expensive. Broadband existed only in the largest centers, and so on. But we've had a development from concentration to dispersion. Hard and software have become so much cheaper, new applications, cell phones, and so on, broadband expansion, mobile broadband nets, and software for video communication that have become better and better. So when COVID-19 came, everything was there to make remote working possible. And today, part-time remote working have been established in large share of the labor markets of many countries. People's place of residence becomes less and less dependent of workplaces' location. If we assume that longer commuting times can be accepted if you don't have to be at the urban workplace all days a week. The conclusion from this is probably that attractive regions are the winners. And then you say, oh, is it all about local amenities? Of course not. All the other things that we talk about need to be there too. But maybe it is so that the regions where the game changers locate are characterized by certain amenities that make the region attractive. But our knowledge about amenities is quite limited. Often in the research that included amenities, this is a disamenity. Good. Should I try to talk? No.
Let's just wait for a second.
Yeah. taxonomy of amenities and in these amenities after the provider. I won't have time to say very much about it, but it's sort of traditional division in natural amenities, public or non-profit, in which public infrastructure, of course, is very important, and commercial activities. And these are things that we will try to measure at all the municipalities in Sweden and build up a database about it. And then the last slide had disappeared. So I can just say that, of course, it's not only about amenities, but here is something that we haven't been very careful with in our studies so far. Here we can make a contribution, and of course, we would like to have international collaboration on this topic as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Hans. So obviously, mic is not working anymore, so we're trying to speak loudly down here. Hopefully, you guys can hear us. So wonderful presentations. If I may sum up, Mark was talking about regional policy at the center of contention, the region as an entity that disturbs the traditional aspects of state, space, institutionalism, and of course, the reference to Back to the Future. Thank you for that one. Emma, future making with history as a non-linear but strongly connected, embedding guideposts, and of course the important role of leadership. We then talked about regional past as not a singular kind of construct, so regions do not have one past, but many usable pasts, and it's about how to activate those. And then Hans, last but not least, the times are changing, as we heard, and while the impact on local communities and regions are drastic, that the rules of the game change. And anyways, is it the agents, the entrepreneurs, or even more so the amenities that really we need to focus on? So I think this is a wide breadth of thoughts on the original question and topic, and we would now gladly like to open the floor for any further thoughts and questions. So I'm going to collect a couple, and then we let the panelists respond. So I'm not sure if the mics will work. Yeah, we have one question already there. Comment. Okay, great. Thank you. Oh.
Thank you, the chair and the panelist, Joseph Dahl from the Uni of West of Scotland. So the panel basically, like the name saying, can regions escape the past, emphasize more on the constraints of history and also limitations, but I get a more positive take from the panel. So how can regions leverage their historical past and identity or assets without being trapped by the history? Thank you very much.
Thank you. We take a couple of more questions. There's one over there.
One.
Okay, I should speak loud, yeah? Okay. Yeah, so good morning to everybody. My name is Maria Rastvorova. I'm associate professor at the Krok University in Kyiv. And as well, I'm a postdoc researcher at the University of Graz. And I found like this topic, especially in the morning, about pasts and futures of the region, really very interesting one. And I have a question based on this geopolitical turbulence and conflict-rid world we live now, about how to deal with the past when different countries and different actors are on the opposite side. So when some country uses propaganda, is it like dealing with the past, or is it artificial history? And how ethical should we reinterpret their past and like what is the place and what is the balance between reinterpreting the past, reconciliation, tolerance, and forgetting. Thanks.
Thank you. I think we're going to leave it with those questions for the moment. So how to leverage the past, if I understood correctly, and then almost a related question, the perspective of past from different sides and how this is used in good and bad, I suppose. So would any of you four, yeah, Mark? You want to take a take?
Yeah, on the first question, I think there are ways of doing it if you want to lapse into methods and processes again. I think for my work on urban futures, I've always been interested in what we face up to about the past, what we can learn from the past, albeit it is selective, as we've already heard and already agreed. There are methods in foresight and forecasting, which involves backcasting. And that's essentially to see how did we get here, the position that we're in. And sometimes it means facing up to the realities of past interventions, past decisions, which has major externalities, not always are positive in nature, some are negative, but this is where we are. And that could be formalized into a process, a conversation, a discussion, a debate even, or as part of participatory democracy, about reconciling where we are today, providing it's used as a basis for a discussion about where do you think we're going tomorrow. So it's not there for the sake of just looking back. People are sometimes uncomfortable and always have been uncomfortable with modernity and change. And nostalgia comes into that because people look backwards for comfort during immense processes of change in that maelstrom. If you look at Marshall Berman's work, for example, about the difficulties or the longing to look back over your shoulder to see where you've come from, to try and make sense of where you are today. I think you can do that quite well in our sort of field, but you have to remind ourselves, we have to remind everyone that there's a purpose of it, and the purpose is to think ahead, not just to look backwards for a long vanished past that's gone or perhaps didn't exist in the first place. So I would say there's issues possibly about backcasting, to think about the possibilities of the future. That might mean thinking in very different ways about future possibilities compared to where we are now. So there's an element of being uncomfortable about absorbing that. And you're looking for spaces of opportunity. And those spaces for opportunity and innovation, if you want to use a different word, means thinking differently about where we are today and perhaps breaking from where we've got to. It might not be a desirable past that we sort of confront. It might be an exceptional past that finally does not dictate where we might go in the future. The problem is that underlying all of that is the idea of thinking long term. And increasingly in our politics, politicians don't like thinking long term. They don't even like thinking in short election cycles. And so policy people, academics, we need to have responsibility ourselves to step up, to provide that long-term perspectives and critical reflection and analysis of long-term trends, and then find ways of embedding that into the policy-making and democratic process, uncomfortably sometimes for some of those actors involved. On the second question, while I've got the floor, on the second question, yes, related to the same sorts of issues that I've just referred to. I'm doing work on digitalization at the moment, and the crossover between digitalization and the real world, between digital and analog, how they affect space and place. And of course, part of that issues of misinformation and disinformation, which is now rife through social media, and the rewriting of history as part of that propaganda, as part of misinformation and disinformation. And it's already affecting the democratic process, it's already affecting democratic debate, it's affecting policy making, it's affecting decision making in government as well. That blurring between what is fake and what is the reality. And so there's an issue here for us, providing the evidence base, the truth, if you want to put it bluntly, to stand up to some of those myths and propaganda issues as well. But it also means facing up to the past as well, and the uncomfortable past as part of that. Of course, it's the victors that write history. So sometimes you need alternative histories, alternative perspectives of how people have dealt with the past, cope with them as well, as part of a relevant narrative. And so it's not impossible to do. I always think that we need to confront some of the uncomfortableness of where we've come from, where we are today, in order to think about the future. But it's long-term and it's forward-thinking.
Very good. Yeah, Hans?
If we go back to football, you can replace all the players in a football team, and then you get something completely new that can play. But you cannot do that with a region. People are there still. And I think this shows that we have to have other means. We cannot have completely creative destruction, at least, but to some extent it's necessary in order to adapt to changing conditions. Let me give one example, one successful example in Sweden of regional development in the northern interior of Sweden, which for many decades have been a depopulating area, with one exception: the municipality of Åre and the village of Åre. And those of you who are interested in alpine skiing who knows that Åre is an international ski resort. They have the World Cup almost every year there, the World Cup circus. What is unique with Åre? It's that they have been able to, by entrepreneurial initiatives from below, state support from the above, later on international investments and so on, been able to build this to some often called the most remote suburb of Stockholm, and it's 600 kilometers in between. In this little village that had for the last 20 years increased their population with about 200%, which is also unique. In this little village, we can find a unique combination of amenities. Lots of urban amenities that you usually only find here in Gothenburg or Stockholm, say. Good restaurants, good party, rock and roll, and so on, skiing, but also wilderness around the corner. I think more regions can find these and other types of unique combinations and become more attractive.
Very good. Let's move on and collect a few more questions. Back there, there's two, and in the very back, there's also one.
Hi, I'm Joni Willett, University of Exeter, Penryn campus. Thanks. This has been a very thought-provoking panel, so thank you very much. And I think one of the threads that's really pulling through for me at the moment, I'm just thinking about power. So, like Emma, from your talk about the missing 50% really within regional stories, and power over particular storytelling, or power over which particular amenities become invested in, and things like this. And I was just wondering whether you could think about, sort of muse about that a little bit, especially with regards to the particular kinds of regional imaginaries. I mean, Åre, for example, is developing a very specific kind of regional imaginary, right? But that isn't value-free. That would have had... There would have been a lot of debate and discussion about whether to be able to do that, and also about having the practical infrastructure in order to be able to do it in the first place, right? So, it's got a train line and a road, and presumably great internet and stuff, like, things that, infrastructure that's really important in order to be able to support that particular imaginary. Yeah, I'll leave it there.
Okay, let's collect. There's one right behind there.
Yes, Robert Hassink, based at Kiel University, Germany. I've got a question concerning Hans, what he said about football. Very interesting. You said you can replace the full team, but that's not what you can do with the region. But it's not fully true, because there are also migrants, people moving from other regions into regions, and they could also play a role concerning escaping from the past or radically change the vision of regions. So I would like to hear more about the role of migrants and people moving from other regions into the regions for breaking with the past.
Very good. There's one question in the very back there, please.
Thank you. Jack Newman, University of Manchester. So when we look at the long past of regions and think about their future, I think the inequalities between regions become even more stark. Some lack the amenities, some lack the leadership, some have very gendered inequalities, some lack the opportunities to rebrand, some are much more aligned to what academics think a region to be, and some less so. So I wonder if you could say a bit more about these spatial inequalities in thinking about how regional pasts determine their future. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so we're trying to be quick. I see a lot of hands up still. So Emma, will you respond to the power and regional imaginaries?
Yes,
first,
certainly. Yeah, thanks for the question. I think it's just at the heart of what we're talking about is power across the panel in different ways. I think there are, obviously there's different forms of power at play here. There's really explicit and structural forms of power, but there's also the kind of quieter registers that we see all the time in this room. Like, we see these structures of power. And I really like what Mark said there about being uncomfortable, because I think that is a big part, is to sit with discomfort sometimes and be able to have these challenging conversations sometimes on different scales and in different ways. But, you know, Hui Wen might say more about the kind of literacy of how we do this. For me, I've been curating a special issue on the geographies of the future and how people are thinking about that. And I've been really struck by the different ways that people are imagining and using different methods to break down these structures of power that kind of really hold back how we think more creatively and openly and uncomfortably, and also in a way that we're not scared to get things wrong, or even to have a conversation that might not sound perfect. We might use some language sometimes that, you know, but if the will is there to have an uncomfortable conversation in a way that is respectful, I think that's really important. But just some of the ways that other colleagues have been thinking about that, it's through gaming, people have been doing things, through science fiction, through much more creative methods. And I think sometimes the ability to suspend reality, to almost take some of that away, so we're not thinking about actually my role here and now. We're sort of taking away that reality that helps us think a little bit more creatively and imagine in different ways. So I'm really interested in some methods that are along those lines. But I think sitting with the discomfort and being able to challenge things in big and small ways is really important. That's a huge question, though. But thank you for it.
Very good. So Robert is asking if migrants can help to escape the past. Hans?
Well, absolutely. That is something I should have added. Although, of course, there are different types of migrants, whether they come from the country or if they are international migrants. But of course, a certain proportion of them have other knowledge, other experiences, and other types of entrepreneurship that can be very useful in seeing opportunities where the residing population don't see them because they are so used to that things are as they are. So definitely, migrants play a very important role often in this regional development.
Very good. And last, we had a question about spatial inequalities. So, Vivian, you want to say a few words to that, maybe?
Yes, I think as I also briefly mentioned in the presentation, I think there's no one single past and there's also no one single future. So we should always use pasts and futures when we talk about different regions, pasts and futures. And I think and then there's probably place-specific elements in each and every region. So, and also like like you also mentioned, these amenities, but also like gender perspective, and also like maybe also the industrial fabrics, preconditions that all matter. So I guess there's probably an agency, what actors are capable of doing in different regions are different. So probably I think it will be very much like a region-specific type of this combination of the two. But if I may, I want to actually respond to this artificial history because we have similar, maybe, well, not artificial, but one history to interpretations also between mainland China and Taiwan. So I think that's also, and Mike, you mentioned that winners, they always write the history. But I think who should decide, which history is correct? I think we should not basically that this kind of external exposure sort of influence, or let's say people from outside certain regions or territories decide what is history for them. I think histories are lived, experienced, and also like practiced. I think the local people who live there, they should have also the right to say what is history for them. Yeah.
Very good. There's a question right there, please.
Hello, Nicholas Sweeney, University of Manchester. So I think that this question mainly concerns Emma and Hui Wen, because it's about the future, and perhaps I'm coming at it from a slightly different perspective, namely the kind of writings of like Derrida and Fisher and this hauntological idea of the future. And I think that it's important here because capitalism has two effects, is an argument, right? So it first of all means that our kind of cultural imagination and the way that we view the future is increasingly risk adjusted because we need to be kind of investing in things that are already profitable and then varying on themes that are working. So it's kind of closing the future in that dimension. And then the second part is actually the more economic insecurity and the 0-hour contracts or weekly benefits, actually limiting the luxury of the future, right? The time in which the future can be assessed. And I was just wondering how these kind of intersectional and regional perspectives can kind of add to this story, and just kind of any thought on this kind of fundamentally aspatial approach, like how can we add to this through those two lenses? Because I think there's work to be done. It's just your perspectives would be excellent. Thank you.
Very good. Is there one more question? Oh, that was a heavy one anyway. So let's go on.
Heavy one, yeah.
Thank you.
It's a good one, though. Do you want?
Please.
Okay. Yeah, I think that you're absolutely this temporality that we're dealing with. This ability of people who have power, space, capacity to think about the long view versus the everyday, and I think that's one of the things that it kind of goes back to the question about power as well, and the idea of who's got a seat at the table. I'm really heartened by so much of the work that goes on in communities. If you talk to community leaders, to people doing a lot of the groundwork, they can talk to you about a future. They can talk to you about a vision. But they don't often have time and capacity to be in those formal conversations about imagining and about future visions. And I think that imbalance of who's having these conversations is really, really critical. And of course, ideas of, I showed some consultation before on one of my slides, and it's great that work's getting done, but of course if people are so stretched in their everyday, they don't have the time, the capacity to be involved in those kind of formal means of consultation, and that in itself we need to understand. And so, I'm aware of other work that's going on in the region that I'm working in that is trying to spend more time with people to understand what their needs are in order to feed that up. But it takes time and it takes money. Both of those things are in short supply at the moment. And this constant pressure is of the way in which we're working and precarious contracts and the cost of living crisis and all of these geopolitical events. They consume so much of our capacity to think in that way. But I do think, coming back to kind of intersectional approaches, I think shedding light on that is really important. I think acknowledging that these inequalities are there, because often they're not found in the literature that we deal with when we think about imagining or kind of leadership. And so to kind of just shed light, if nothing else, that's probably not a perfect answer, and I don't have one. But I think that's a really important political project. I'm really interested in this idea of care, not as a feminine or sector, actually more of a radical politics and ethics of care that we need to be able to shed light on things in order to move that conversation forward. Hui Wen?
Yeah, I think you covered already a lot, but I want to maybe tackle or address the issue of aspatial, of those kind of aspect of, some always, if there's some kind of imaginary, like AI or that's, then a lot of regions just go about it and, and without thinking whether that's appropriate for them. So I think there's often this kind of, there's like a sociology of expectations. They do a lot of this kind of work on, how to make certain imaginaries performative or not. But like, as you just rightly point out, they lack this kind of geography sensitivity. And I think there's a lot of need to be done in that regard, and also to develop maybe the mechanism of how actually this kind of expectations or imaginaries, they actually work differently in different regions. And also when they say this externally exposed imaginary, how do regions actually react to that? And, and also like whether they connect to, let's say, collaborations between regions, or let's say drift them apart, become more competitive with each other, or things like that. So I think there's a lot need to be done on that.
Okay, Mark, did you want to say
very quickly, because I don't want to keep you from coffee, but I think there are issues about, obviously, structural problems with places. I think what we're seeing is also recognition of the paucity of politics and democratic representation now. So I think people are actively searching out alternative modes, shall we say. Creativity is my experience as well. It can perform amazing functions in giving people voices, giving people platforms. And when it works, it's fantastic. But what it does, it raises expectations then. Yeah. And a translation over into government and politics and decision-making. And that is not a straightforward process between the expectations about wanting to do something, about recognizing problems and acting upon it, with actually the tools and methods in politics that we have in order to, or finance for that matter, in order to do it. I think there's something about recognizing place-based assets, and I don't mean just economic assets. I mean issues to do with resources and infrastructure and amenities that some places have, other places don't. Could we think in terms of alternative commodities, alternative trading between regions? That is really going back to the future in terms of recognizing the assets that some places have that others require, and vice versa. And then also the agility that comes with new approaches and new understandings and new platforms and new voices, and raising those expectations and acting upon it. What you need is a sense of not one size fits all in your governance processes, but also a recognition that you've got a suite of methods, a suite of tools, the options to pick and mix different approaches to suit certain circumstances in certain places. That agility is fantastic to have in policy making, but they need legitimacy. So you can't have one without the other.
Well, on that note, time is flying when you're having fun, so we're all out of time. I would like to thank the organizers for inviting us to this panel, for you guys for showing up this morning, and let's give it up for Mark, Emma, Hui Wen, and Hans for really great talks. Thank you. Enjoy the coffee break.